Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. A few centuries ago, Africa's evolution and civilization came to a crossroads with colonization. And at that time, slave trade was the continent's initiation into globalization. Slaves were shipped off to North and South America and other parts of the world to work in rice fields, coffee farms, cotton plantations, and even in houses as servants. Although such acts have long been abolished, slavery is still a worldwide problem with millions of people trapped in its modern-day form. So what are your thoughts on modern-day slavery on the African continent? You can share with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Thanks for joining us.
It's a journey into Africa's dark history of slavery, and our destination is Gorée Island, a transit port for slaves located off the coast of Senegal. For more than 300 years of slave trade in the continent, this island was one of the main centers for the trade in West Africa, and it is believed that about 20 million Africans passed through the tiny island to plantations in Europe and the Americas. Built in 1776, Gorée is a 45-acre island with a population of about 1,200 people. But this historic monument stands out. Papi Saul has been a tour guide for more than 25 years. He told us that about 30 slaves are cramped in this dingy cell with just this tiny space as the only source of ventilation.
You see, that's the place of the scale. But only the men are beweight, not women, no kids, The price of a man who has 60 kilos or more 60 kilos is a gun because he needs gun to fight with different tribes. The price of woman is about wine. Why? Because they have to drink wine to be afraid to be killed. And the price of the kids is only a mirror.
It's emotional for me every time I come here. It's part of the African history, and it's my pleasure to know about the Atlantic slave trade.
There are several signs of the inhumanity of slavery here, but none sparked more emotion than this open door.
This is the door of no return. It is the exit point for the slaves.
Once out of this doorway, there is really no hope of return. There are ships across the Atlantic to work in plantations, or if dead in transit, are thrown to the sharks to be feasted upon. The island of Gorée has for years now become a tourist destination for many world leaders, and the images of America's first black president Barack Obama at the door of no return have renewed global focus on the museum. Doshima Abu, TVC News, Gorée Island, Senegal.
Every year, August 23rd is marked as International Day for the remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition. Now, beyond reminding the world of the tragedy of the transatlantic slave trade, it is also a chance to reflect on the consequences of modern slavery. Now, joining us on Africa Today, we have Clem Baye, a political and media consultant in Lagos here in Nigeria. You're welcome to Africa Today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good to see you.
All right, and on Skype in Ghana, we have Sonia Kwame, is a senior campaigner of Walk Free, a movement to end modern-day slavery. And also joining us later on Skype is Professor Robert Rothberg, President Emeritus of the World Peace Foundation in the United States. Now, let's start it this way. As the world commemorates the abolition of slave trade, when the word slave trade is mentioned, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Slave trade. The classic form of it is gone, all right? But the modern form of it is there. Slavery is still there. We have about 30 million people globally in one form of slavery or the other.
Okay.
In Africa, possibly like about between 3 to 5 million are in one form of slavery or the other. Now, the slave trade merely commercialized the slavery that was in existence. It was a wholesale attempt to move so many people. Somebody asked me, somebody very close to me asked me recently that where were Colombian footballers? Where were there blacks among Colombian footballers? I said, that's the impact of slavery. The impact of the slave trade is that a lot of blacks were shipped across to the Americas, North and South America, and we see the impact of that. The trade itself, would you say the modern forms of slave trade is like that of the classical one? I would say no. Okay. We have people being trafficked, we have sex slaves, we have child labor, and all sorts that are happening globally. And Africa is not excluded, sad to say.
Now, so in this modern slavery, as you call it, what are the impacts of this modern day slavery? Because certainly the old form of slavery where outrightly people were snatched and abducted and kidnapped and sent to the Americas, that's gone now. In fact, these days we hear that there's some persons who just want to leave their continent because of hunger or war or violence and go to Europe or other parts. They're volunteering to become slaves, as the case may be. But what are the impacts of all of this on our modern day society now on the continent?
The impact is that slavery, modern day slavery and slave trade is a direct part, function of the poverty that we find in the third world nation, especially most African countries. Take, for instance, the world's largest cocoa producer, Ivory Coast. They do have a form of indentured slavery in which children are brought into the system. They are not paid for the labor, and they cannot leave. The thing about slavery is not so much that you're compelled to work, but you're compelled to the extent that you're not only paid. It's not just that you're not paid, but it's the fact that you cannot leave.
Okay.
So to that extent, you are deprived of your freedom. It's a gross violation of human rights, and this is still happening. And I dare say that even the feeling that there's no seizing people and kidnapping people, I dare say it still continues. It happens in South Sudan, it happens in Darfur, it is happening in Mauritania, it is happening. The only thing is that massive commercialization of it is not there. It's secretly taking place. I mean, Mauritania is the last country in the world to formally abolish slavery, but it is still a fact of life that in Mauritania, about 2 to 5% of the people are slaves.
Wow, that is mind-boggling. But however, all this now boils down to issues of government principles, the rule of law, the constitution across the country, all the different societal rules and so on. So from your assessment, are the African leaders doing anything? Are they really conscious of some of these trends in the modern day society on the continent?
I think African leaders are doing something, albeit toggle my memory right now, I really cannot point to anything specifically, but I do know that in Nigeria we have the NAPTIP, National Something for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, in people. That's a good something. A couple of countries are doing that, Ghana and a few others. But the problem is the thinking and the social setup. Where the social setup allows this type of massive discriminatory, is violation of the person's human rights. Okay. If that doesn't translate into the thinking of the people, you will have a body of legislation that is not having an impact because either it is not being implemented or is being implemented more in the breach.
Okay, we'll come back to this. Now we have joining us via Skype Robert Rothberg from the United States now. Robert, you're welcome to Africa Today. Now let me ask, many years after slavery was abolished, many say it never really stopped. What's your assessment of that?
Maybe in some ways slavery hasn't stopped, but if you mean literally, it's only present in Africa in some Muslim areas, especially Mauritania.
All right, if you can hear me, how widespread across Africa is the issue of modern-day slavery from your assessment?
But certainly there is some modern-day slavery in the literal sense across the Sahel, from Mauritania probably through the Sudan, and into places like Somalia. But it's not one of the great problems of Africa anymore.
All right, now compared to slave trade as it was in the past, what is the difficulty in ending modern-day slavery?
Well, the difficulty in modern-day slavery is that most countries don't acknowledge that it exists within their midst, particularly Mauritania.
All right, now, okay. If you can hear me, we seem to be having some challenges on the line there. But if you can hear me now, let me ask this, because I asked this question in my guest in the studio. Now, from your assessment, African leaders, are they doing enough to try to change the trends on modern-day slavery from your assessment?
Yes, I think most modern African leaders are against slavery and doing something to combat it, but there are some areas, I don't know the details, but in northern Nigeria, in Mauritania, and conceivably in places like Chad and Niger, there is slavery which isn't acknowledged, and therefore the leaders are doing too little to deal with it.
Thank you very much for joining us, Robert Rodberg from the US. Thank you. All right, we seem to have a little challenge with his audio there, but let's come back to this. Now, you mentioned in Nigeria, for instance, you mentioned NAPTIP.
Yeah.
There are other agencies across African countries that try to check people, trafficking people, and so on. But how effective are some of the? Because even in Nigeria, you mentioned there are still people who are sent from one part of the country to another, doing different kind of things which they originally wouldn't do by themselves. But just like you said, you were forced to do this. It's like it's voluntary. Sometimes they pay you, but they monitor you in such a way that you can't leave. So how effective are those laws and those agencies?
The agencies are doing their best. Okay, I don't speak for them. I can criticize them. But what I'd like to say is that is the mindset that has to change first. People have to start seeing this thing as abominable. People have to start saying I abhor this, and people have to start saying it must stop. When the masses, when the body, the general population starts saying that this is not right, things change. No matter how much the legislation, we have a situation in which the rule of law is not as effective and as comprehensive and far-reaching in most African countries as it is in the developed countries. A lot of the times the laws are not implemented because the law enforcement agencies don't have the capacity to investigate, they don't have the capacity to pursue, and they don't have the capacity to seek prosecution. All right. So to that extent, these things still do happen. But the challenge is this, that culturally and socially, if you have a system that culturally has allowed that a group of people are to be an underclass and to remain underprivileged, and people have accepted it, and people are still saying that, oh, your great-grandfather was a slave, so you're also a slave, then it's difficult to change.
All right, we'll come back to this. Now, between the 16th and the 19th century, it is estimated that about 40 to 100 million people were directly affected by slavery via the Atlantic, Arabian, and trans-Saharan routes. Now, fast forward to the 21st century, and you have about 30 million people across the globe currently living in modern slavery, with Africa making the most contribution. We'll go on a quick break, and Africa Today will be back. Stay with us. Right, the theme for this year's International Day for the Remembrance of Slave Trade is abolition is victory over slavery. But organizers are also using the opportunity to raise awareness on the dangers of racism and prejudice. Now, let's come back to this issue. Before we went on break, you talked about the need to change, or mind change, as the case, and the mindset of people has to change. But in the face of poverty, illiteracy, and some of these social problems, how easy is it going to ensure that minds will change when people don't even have normal food to eat and so on?
Well, as I said, slavery thrives in a place where there's already poverty, where there's ignorance and absence of enforcement of fundamental human rights. But you know, amongst even some of the ethnic groups in Nigeria, among some of the major ethnic groups, you do have some forms of slavery. People are classified as being second-class citizens, don't marry from this particular group, don't touch this party. It just happened especially amongst the 2 or 3 of our main ethnic groups in Nigeria.
We have the caste system.
We have
some
a caste
people
system.
belong up there, and they're not allowed to go down.
There are some people that are regarded as subhuman beings, just by very virtue of some historical antecedent that you belong to this class, so you will always be. And then you also have, in my view, and this could be controversial, the fact that you have in the north, for instance, you have about 20 million children that should be in school that are not in school, and in Western type school. They're in the Almajiri type of school. They're not slaves. But what it does essentially is that they cannot be productive because they are tied to their malame, the people that are teaching them, and these ones cannot feed them, so they send them out on the streets to go and look for food on a daily basis. Senegal has been able to deal with it, maybe because it's on a lower scale. I do not for a moment call it slavery, do you understand?
Yeah, of course.
But it's a serious social issue.
Okay. We'll come back. Now, we have Sonia Kwame from Ghana joining us right now. Sonia, you're welcome to Africa Today. Now, with the issue like hate, prejudice, and racism in mind, what are your concerns on the level of modern slavery in Africa and the world?
I'll just want to start by talking about what Work Free as an organization actually looks at what modern slavery is. And we'll look at that in the context of the question you just asked. We look at modern slavery in terms of slavery practices, such as you're looking at debt bondage, forced marriages, sale and exploitation of children, more human trafficking, forced labor, and other practices that, if you find in most of the international conventions, relate to slavery, a kind of an ownership of a person. Sometimes you find practices like racism being one of the root causes of modern slavery, or slavery in itself, because somebody feels he's better than the other person racially. He feels that he or she is superior, and such a person should be owned by the one who feels he or she is superior. So it's actually part of the root causes of slavery.
All right, Sonia, there have been talks about the West paying billions of dollars in reparation for enslaving Africans. Now, how far would that go in solving the problem?
I believe that I don't want to actually have let's say, I don't really have an opinion about reparation. But I think that what is really critical is looking at the issue of modern day slavery today. We have so many women who get trafficked to the West. Sometimes they are deceived with good jobs, and which never existed. We have forced marriages, for example, the case of the kidnapping of the over 200 girls in their school in Nigeria by Boko Haram, where there were threats that some of the girls were going to be sold as low as $10. We also have cases where we have servitude or bondage, like in what we call the Trokosi system in Ghana, and also where we also have domestic workers from Africa working in the Gulf countries like Kuwait, Qatar, and the rest, where their passports are seized under the kafala system and their employers feel they own them. So I believe that it's not just about reparation. No matter the billions that are given to Africa, if modern day slavery it's not checked, we will come back to square one. I think the most important thing is that modern slavery in all its forms should be abolished. And it takes the concerted effort of business to ensure that there are ethical practices and they do not exploit labor. It will take the effort of governments to ensure that the right legal framework and support and enforcement exist. And also communities who will see modern slavery as evil and who will shun that. And so it takes a concerted effort. It's not just enough to say that the West should pay for reparation. Slavery exists today. Work Free's global slavery instead talks about the fact that 29.8 million people, estimated number of people, are living in modern slavery. And for me, that is the key. We can abolish it in a generation if transatlantic slave trade could be abolished at that time.
All right, Sonia, let me ask you now, Africa seems to be on the receiving end, whether in the old form of slavery or the new form of slavery. But in true terms, this consciousness rests in the minds of all Africans one way or the other. But what do you think, or how well has African leaders, what have they done to try to abolish or break Africa free from this modern day trend of things?
It's quite a mixed story. It doesn't look very good, but there's also hope. For example, if we look at the 10 West countries in the world, Mauritania tops the league, what we call the Global Slavery Index. And you can get it at www.globalslaveryindex.com, one of Wall Street's publications. And then we have Benin as well, La Côte d'Ivoire, the Gambia, and we have all these other countries in Africa. Much as we did not fare too well in terms of the index, we also see that governments in Africa are gradually coming up with some measures. For example, anti-human trafficking laws, different legislations against child labor. We still have a long way to go, and there is still the need for more effort to be made. It's not a very good picture. Businesses need to also be checked, and laws enforced to ensure that labor isn't exploited, that people are not exploited under bondage labor, forced labor, and a certain kind of servitude, or just plain exploitation because there are no jobs. So all these form part of modern day slavery. And so I believe that African governments have got a long way to go. And we acknowledge the efforts being made by many countries in Africa. All
right, Sonia, thank you very much for talking to us on Africa Today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, if steps have to be taken, for instance, everything you're saying, everything she's saying, and everything Robert has said from the United States, governments of Africa, African governments are listening, for instance. If tangible steps have to be taken to abolish the modern day slavery or to try to reduce the trend, what are those steps that need to be taken?
We need to improve the living conditions of the generality of the people, especially in the rural areas. We need a lot of education in changing the mindset of people. For instance, some of the things that the contributor very brilliantly put across have to do with the fact that if you have somebody, let's say for instance, someone says that my great-grandfather borrowed, I don't know, 200 pounds. Let's just say that. Or my grandfather borrowed 200 pounds. And they say all the while he could not pay the 200 pounds. But actually, he had paid the 200 pounds because what happens is that they tell you that you keep paying 50 pence every month until you've exhausted it. What they actually mean is that the amount you're contributing towards something does not go to the principal. You just keep servicing a never-ending debt. Now, I just use that as an illustration. I now say that, oh, that family, they perpetually owed another family. So they are in servitude for life. And you have a situation in which some cultures, especially in the south, in some parts of the South, particularly Cross River and Akwa Ibom, they tell you that in Nigeria, they tell you that this child was born, and there's a suspicion that the child is a witch, and that instantly results in some problems for both the child and the mother. Because the stigma over there. It becomes a stigma, and so somebody can own them and possess them and say, I'm protecting you from society coming to kill you. So you become essentially my slave. All these things, we have to work against it. Now, in the Arab world, a lot of the blacks that were trafficked to the Arab world have come out and the rest of it, but there's still a lot of slavery that's going there. Until people begin to shun it, until people begin to change their minds, governments can do a lot. But my contention is that no matter what the governments are doing, until people start saying that this is simply not right, until economic conditions are such that social considerations are such that people can go to school and have an improvement in their well-being, have access to economic opportunities, it will always be a power game. It's a power game that led to it in the first instance. It's a power game that is reviving it and keeping it in, on a hot burner.
Okay. Now, but lastly, but keeping the African leaders aside, the individual, because we have talked to people, we've come across people, even living very comfortably in countries like South Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, for instance, who naturally, not because they have any crisis or violence, but they just want to leave Africa and travel to the Europe or something. How do we reconcile that?
Well, how we reconcile is that when economic opportunities are few and far between, people trying to drive towards where economic opportunities are. Unfortunately, look at the numbers that have been killed, especially in Lampedusa, in the Italian Sicilian coast, and the rest of it, as they're trying to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa into Europe. A lot of people get killed. They drown, maybe they're sharks, maybe they just drown, and the rest of it. Why are they doing things like that? Why aren't Europeans struggling to come over like this? Because the economy is not doing well, because our leaders are not doing well enough as a group. Maybe some are doing far better than the others, but we are speaking about the African continent now, which is our main interest and our focus, and where we belong to. And it's a place that we were born into, and we owe it a duty to continue to speak against these things, that it is simply not right. And we as individuals need to change our mindset and begin to allow economic opportunities for everybody.
All right, thank you very much, Klembaye, for coming on Africa Today. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
We also thank Sonia for joining us from Ghana and Robert from joining us from the United States. Now, slave trade may have been abolished many years ago, but many say the fight to end its present-day form is far from over. So kindly take a minute, spare a thought, and act now for the millions trapped by debt, exploited in poverty, stripped of their dignity, and sentenced to a lifetime of man's inhumanity to man. For Africa, it is believed that when the continent is at peace with itself, its people will be slave to no one. That's our show for today. Join us next time for another episode of the program. I am Mike Okwoche, and remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.